Boeing 707. In 1958, Boeing changed the world without most people realizing it. Flying across the Atlantic meant hours on a propeller-driven aircraft, loud, slow, and exhausting. But the 707 was different. It was the first commercially successful jet-powered passenger aircraft, and it made long-distance air travel feel fast for the first time. Pan American World Airways launched the first transatlantic 707 service in October 1958, cutting crossing times dramatically. The aircraft could carry around 140 to 180 passengers depending on configuration, cruised at around 600 miles per hour, and had a range that made non-stop intercontinental flights genuinely practical. The jet age had begun, and Boeing was the one who started it. Boeing 727. By the early 1960s, Boeing had proven it could build a plane for long international routes. The next challenge was shorter domestic ones. The 727, which entered service in 1964, was designed specifically for routes between smaller cities where runways were shorter and airport infrastructure was less developed. It had 3 engines mounted at the rear of the fuselage rather than under the wings, which kept the wings clean and allowed for high-lift devices that made steep approaches to shorter runways possible. It was loud by modern standards, but incredibly versatile, and airlines loved it for exactly that reason. The 727 became one of the most widely used aircraft of its era. Over 1,800 were eventually built, a number that seemed extraordinary at the time. Boeing 737. No aircraft in history has sold more than the Boeing 737. First flying in 1967 and entering service in 1968, it was designed as a short to medium-range aircraft that could be operated cheaply and efficiently by airlines on high-frequency routes. It was smaller than the 707 and 727, simpler to maintain, and cheaper to operate. Those qualities made it immediately attractive to airlines looking to expand their networks without spending enormous amounts of money. Decades passed, and the 737 kept evolving. The original 737-100 became the 200, then the 300, 400, 500, then the next generation series in the 1990s, and eventually the MAX series in the 2010s. Each generation brought new engines, updated avionics, and improved fuel efficiency while keeping the fundamental design largely intact. Today, there are more 737s in service around the world than any other commercial aircraft. Boeing 747. If the 737 is the most successful plane Boeing ever built, the 747 is the most iconic. When it entered service with Pan American in January 1970, nothing like it had ever flown commercially. It was enormous, nearly 70 meters long, capable of carrying over 400 passengers in a typical configuration and up to 600 in a high-density layout. Its defining feature was the upper deck, a hump just behind the cockpit that gave the plane its immediately recognizable silhouette. The 747 made flying feel spacious and almost glamorous at a time when air travel was still considered an event rather than a routine. It drove ticket prices down significantly by spreading operating costs across far more passengers per flight, opening up international travel to people who previously could not afford it. The 747 served as the backbone of international aviation for decades and is still in limited service today, though most airlines have retired it in favor of more fuel-efficient twin-engine aircraft. Boeing 757. By the late 1970s, fuel costs had become a serious concern for airlines following the oil crises of that decade. Boeing responded with the 757, which entered service in 1983. It was a narrow-body aircraft, single-aisle, typically seating around 200 passengers, but with a surprisingly long range for its size. The 757 was powered by 2 of the most fuel-efficient engines available at the time, and it could fly routes that previously required larger and more expensive aircraft to operate economically. Airlines used it on transatlantic routes, transcontinental services, and high-frequency short-haul operations. Pilots loved it for its performance. It had more thrust relative to its weight than almost any other commercial aircraft of the era, giving it a climb rate that was genuinely impressive. Production ended in 2004, but the 757 remained in heavy service long after. and many airlines continued operating it well into the 2000s. Boeing 767. Entering service in 1982, the 767 was designed to fill a different gap. Where the 757 was narrow and optimized for efficiency on medium routes, the 767 was a wide-body twin-aisle aircraft capable of carrying more passengers over longer distances. It was the first Boeing aircraft to be certified for ETOPS, extended-range twin-engine operations, which meant it could fly long over-water routes that previously required 3 or 4 engine aircraft. That certification was a turning point for commercial aviation. Airlines no longer needed expensive 4-engine jets for transatlantic routes. A twin-engine wide-body could do the job more cheaply and just as safely. The 767 became the aircraft that quietly made modern transatlantic travel affordable, operating routes between North America and Europe at a fraction of the cost of earlier generation aircraft. It remained in production for decades and continues to serve as the basis for the Boeing KC-46 tanker aircraft used by the United States military. Boeing 777. When Boeing launched the 777 in 1995, it was the largest twin-engine commercial aircraft ever built. Everything about it was designed around size, range, and efficiency. It could carry between 300 and 400 passengers, fly non-stop between almost any 2 cities, and do so with just 2 engines, something that would have seemed impossible to airlines a generation earlier. The 777 was also notable for being the first commercial aircraft designed entirely using computer-aided design, with no physical mock-up ever built. That process allowed Boeing to involve airlines directly in the design, incorporating feedback from launch customers like United Airlines into the final product before a single part was manufactured. The result was an aircraft that operators found extremely practical to fly and maintain. The 777 became the preferred choice for long-haul international routes and remains one of the most widely operated wide-body aircraft in the world today, with the updated 777X variant continuing the lineage into a new generation. Boeing 787 Dreamliner. When the 787 entered service with All Nippon Airways in 2011, it represented the biggest technological leap in commercial aviation in decades. The most significant change was the material the aircraft was made from. Around 50% of the 787's primary structure, including the fuselage and wings, is made from carbon fiber composite rather than aluminum. That single decision reduced the aircraft's weight dramatically, which in turn reduced fuel consumption by roughly 20% compared to similarly sized aircraft of the previous generation. But the composite fuselage allowed for something else too. Because the material does not corrode the way aluminum does, Boeing could maintain higher cabin humidity levels and lower the effective cabin altitude, making long flights significantly more comfortable for passengers. The windows are larger than on any previous commercial aircraft and use electrochromic dimming instead of physical shades. The cabin pressure is equivalent to an altitude of 6,000 feet rather than the 8,000 feet typical of older aircraft. For passengers on long-haul flights, the difference is noticeable. The 787 faced significant delays and a well-publicized battery issue early in its service life. But once those problems were resolved, it became one of the most ordered commercial aircraft in Boeing's history and a genuine shift in what passengers and airlines could expect from a modern long-haul jet.